Hello students, this is Dr. Kavita Devani Joshi and we are meeting again for the same chapter, that is neural control and coordination, right? So in the last lecture, we covered about certain things about brain and its structure, and now and in the last lecture itself we had started with your brain CNS part. So forebrain was the first component of it and we were talking about it, but due to lack of time we could not complete it. So this is the time we have to complete it. So I have to talk about now hypothalamus, because we had a word about thalamus already in just last lecture which you must have attended. So hypothalamus, it is present below thalamus. First of all, you have to remember that that's how it has got its name, and it is considered as, when we talk about its functions, so it is considered as a thermostat because it is responsible for maintaining the temperature of your body, constant temperature of your body. Thermo means temperature, okay, and stat means balance or balancing it or regulating it. Okay, so that's how temperature regulation it performs. This is a very important function of hypothalamus and asked in many questions. Okay, about apart from this, it also helps to maintain your 24 o'clock rhythm. Although it is maintained by a gland, pineal gland, at priority basis, but then second on that second position, it this is your hypothalamus, which helps to maintain your 24 o'clock rhythm, and then it has certain endocrine functions also, and here we are not concerned with endocrine functions right now because we will be discussing them in the chapter endocrine system. Then it is responsible for your sleep, for your sexual desire, okay, then hunger, thirst, satiety, hunger, thirst, satiety. What do you understand by satiety? Satiety is the feeling that your stomach is full when you are eating, and when you say that I'm full now, I cannot eat anymore. So that feeling of fullness, that feeling of satisfaction, it comes via hypothalamus only, and that is called as satiety. Okay, so we can write satiety as feeling of satisfaction. Okay, then apart from it, your behavioral regulation also it is responsible for. That means, for example, if you are sitting in a class in front of your teacher, or when you are sitting in front of your parents, how you have to talk. You always think and then talk, but when you are sitting with your friend, you do not think much. So you know that where you should talk what. So that sense comes via hypothalamus, right? So that's how your behavioral regulation it is responsible for that also. Behavior regulation for survival. Now you can understand that if you are sitting in a class and you are saying some wrong words or the things which you should not say in front of your teacher, so then at that time you can even go out of the class via him or her. So for survival means, for your survival how you should behave, that is decided or that is regulated by hypothalamus. That means, for example, you are not well, so you know that if I have to survive, if I have to remain alive, I have to take medicines or do something about it, or take some precautionary measures. That sense also comes via hypothalamus, right? So that's how this function is important to understand. Behavioral regulation for survival. Okay, these are certain functions, so many functions your hypothalamus performs, so you can understand that that's the reason why it is called as supermaster gland. Why? Because it controls another gland, master gland, that is your pituitary gland also, right? So these are the functions. And emotions also, right? Emotions, like your anger, grief, sorrow, happiness, satisfaction, all these emotions are also under the control of your hypothalamus. Okay, so when now we talk about the limbic system, right? A limbic system is composed of two, that is amygdala and hippocampus. So Amygdala is responsible for your moods. So sometimes your mood is not that good, or you are having a bad mood. Or on another day you are feeling extremely happy and you even don't know yourself why is it happening. So amygdala is responsible for your different moods, and then when we talk about the another part of your limbic system, that is hippocampus. Hippocampus is responsible for converting short-term memory into long-term memory. So sometimes 3 years back, 5 years back, something happened and we even did not discuss it with anybody. But then today, if somebody talked about it a bit and I just recalled the whole story of that time, even it was even when it happened 5 years back and I did not discuss it with anybody for those 5 years. But then also I'm remembering it because that short term memory has got converted into long term memory, and it is present there in the corner of my brain, and that is via hippocampus. So what happens, it converts short term memory into long term memory. Okay, so that's how you remember it. So this was about your forebrain, because forebrain consists of cerebral cortex, corpus striatum, amygdala, hippocampus, and we have discussed all. So immediately we are moving on to midbrain. Okay, so midbrain consists of, I told you that four lobes it consists of. One is two lobes. They are called as uh, superior colliculi, superior colliculi. Okay, upper two lobes they are called as superior colliculi, and the lower two lobes they are called as inferior colliculi. And the function of superior colliculi is visual reflexes. It helps in visual reflexes. Now what do we understand by this? For example, someone is calling me from behind and I turn my head and try to focus that person. So the movement of head is coordinated when with the movement of your eyes. So that coordination is maintained by superior colliculi, and you are you become easily able to focus that person. So these are visual reflexes. And inferior colliculi, they are responsible for auditory reflexes, and auditory reflexes mean same. When someone is calling me from behind and I'm trying to listen to that voice, so I'm turning my head and my ears are also moving, so are also getting moved. So this coordination between the head movement of head and between the movement of ears is considered as auditory reflexes, and it is done with the help of inferior colliculi. And both of these they constitute your corpora quadrigemina. Okay, they both of them they constitute your corpora quadrigemina. Okay, so this is one thing. And when we talk about crura cerebri, I told you it is a tract of nerve fibers. Then we talk about one duct also here, that is a cerebral aqueduct. Cerebral aqueduct is also called by one more name. One is iter and another is aqueduct of Sylvius. Aqueduct of Sylvius. Okay, so this duct passes through midbrain. This is the most important point you have to remember. Even we will be drawing a diagram also when we will be talking about the ventricles. So there you will be able to see this duct also passes through midbrain. For now you have to remember this thing only. Okay, so passes through midbrain. This is another important question which you can find in your questions, which you can find in your exams. Okay, then we have hindbrain, and hindbrain consists of three main components. The first component is pons veruli. Pons means bridge. It connects cerebrum with cerebellum and many other components, and it has a respiratory center present in it, and that center is called as pneumotaxic center, and I explained it to you in the chapter respiratory system. Okay, if you have attended that class, so you must be knowing about it. If you haven't attended, so you must go onto the extra marks app, and you can you can have the access of this lecture, also respiratory system lecture. Then we have another component, which is your medulla oblongata. Okay. And medulla oblongata is responsible for involuntary activities which are not into your control. Okay. Example, you can take off gastric secretions, cardiovascular activities, right? So they are not under your control, obviously. So gastric activities or secretions, we can say, right? Then we can take the name of cardiovascular reflexes, cardiovascular cardiovascular reflexes. Then we can take the name of respiration also. So medulla oblongata is a very important structure for you, for our brain, because when it gets damaged, so we won't be able to survive anymore, because heart will stop working, respiration will not be able to occur. Extension of medulla only forms spinal cord. So in the last lecture, it was a very important lecture where we drew the diagram of the brain, and there it is clearly represented that extension of medulla forms spinal cord. Okay. And then the third component comes as cerebellum, and cerebellum is considered as second largest part of brain. It is also called as little cerebrum. It is having two cerebellar hemispheres exactly like cerebral hemispheres, and it has also some layers of cells, and middle layer consists of flask shaped neurons, which are considered as the most complex neurons, and those neurons are called as Purkinje cells. I am not talking about Purkinje fibers, don't get confused, because Purkinje fibers are talked about in the chapter cardiovascular system, blood, body fluids and circulation, according to your NCRT. But here these neurons, most complex neurons, they are called as Purkinje cells, and here you also find certain cerebellar peduncles which connect the cerebellum to midbrain, medulla and pons. Okay, so the basic thing about it, we can write second largest part of brain, and it also has two cerebellar hemispheres. The gray matter and white matter are same, that means outer part is gray matter and inner part is white matter. Okay. And both of them together, they are called as arbor vitae. So arbor vitae is nothing else but here gray plus white matter, they can be called as arbor vitae. And the function of cerebellum, this is very important for us. Why? Because you will find this question everywhere again and again. So this is very important. It maintains equilibrium and posture. It maintains equilibrium, posture, orientation, whatever you call. So it maintains equilibrium, posture and your orientation. So whenever we walk in a straight way, that means we do not fluctuate or move here and there unnecessarily, because our body's posture, as I'm sitting also in front of you, so that posture is maintained. Equilibrium, posture, orientation, all things are maintained via cerebellum. This is very important function of it, and apart from that, it also helps to regulate your motor activities. It does not initiate them but regulate motor activities. Okay, so maybe slowing them or making them fast. So regulate motor activities, right? So this was all about your cerebellum and hindbrain, and now we are moving on to ventricles of brain. So again, now you must be thinking ventricles, they must be present in heart, but they are also present in brain. Now onwards you have to remember, ventricles are nothing else but cavities of brain. In fact, the term ventricle, it has itself a meaning that it is a cavity. In case of heart also, it is considered as a cavity, but there it is filled by blood, and here it is going to be filled by CSF, that is your cerebrospinal fluid. So to understand it, we are going to make a diagram, right? So you can understand it this way better, because what we will do is we will label them, and after labeling you will get a whole idea of about ventricles, right? So this is how it appears, like this. So we have total 4 ventricles, 2 lateral ventricles, and one is called as third ventricle. 2 lateral ventricles at the top, and one third ventricle, another fourth ventricle. Okay, so let's label it now. These are your 2 lateral ventricles. As you can see, one is this and another is this one. So I can write lateral ventricles, and these lateral ventricles, they are connected to each other with the help of interventricular foramen. So this is considered as interventricular foramen, interventricular foramen, and it is also called by one more name, and that name is foramen of Monro. Foramen of Monro. And below it, this part is your cerebrum, which is considered as the largest part of brain, right? So we can label it as cerebrum, and below it you have diencephalon. So this is your diencephalon, right? Then below it we have this one, which is midbrain. Below midbrain we have pons and cerebellum. So let me draw cerebellum also. So this is your cerebellum, and this is pons. So let me label it first of all, cerebellum. Okay, and this red colored structure, this one is your pons, right? And then below it you have this part as medulla, and below medulla you have spinal cord. So this is spinal cord, and the canal in the center of it, this one, you know that it is your central canal. And if you remember, other than lateral ventricle, we have another ventricle, this one. This is called as third ventricle. So these ventricles are also known by other names. For example, lateral ventricles, they can be called as paracele. They can be called as paracele. Cele means cavity. And third ventricle, it can also be called as diocele. And you know that di has come from the term diencephalon. And this is the fourth ventricle, and fourth ventricle can be termed as your myelocele. The reason behind it is you can call medulla oblongata as myelencephalon. So here we can write myelocele, right? So as we can see that these can have different names according to this. But then there was one duct which passes through midbrain, as I told you that you have to remember, and that is that can be labeled as this. So here this one which is passing through midbrain, this duct can be called as cerebral duct. This duct can be called as cerebral aqueduct. Okay, the other names we have already taken. Cerebral aqueduct, we can call it, right? So that's how you can give the labeling of the whole diagram. So the roof of fourth ventricle, it has two kind of apertures, two lateral apertures, one median aperture. The two lateral apertures, they are called as foramen two lateral apertures at roof of fourth ventricle, okay. The roof of this ventricle can be called as pallium, and it has two lateral apertures, which you have to remember. Apertures means openings, and these are called by the name foramen of Luschka, and one median aperture is present. Lateral means away from midline and median means towards the midline. So that is called as foramen of Magendie. So that's how you can remember these names as well. This diagram which we have drawn is the diagram of ventricles of brain, and via them CSF flows, which is your cerebrospinal fluid, which we have already talked about. Okay, so moving ahead, we are now going to talk about spinal cord. Why? Because we have completed about everything about brain. Spinal cord is considered as the minor coordinating center, and it is the one who helps brain to control all other systems. So both of them, they work in communication with each other. And here we are going to talk about reflex action also. So what is an reflex action? In simple language, when you understand, for example, if somebody touches a hot plate to my hand, so what will happen? I'll just remove my hand immediately like this without even thinking, so that it doesn't get burnt. So do I have to think about it? Do I think about it for 1 minute or 30 seconds or 60 seconds or 2 minutes? If I do so, it will get burnt, obviously. But I do not do that, and immediately my hand is removed as a reflex action. So it is a kind of a movement in about which you are not thinking at all, because the thinking process of our brain, it takes a lot of time, and when it takes a lot of time, till then that process will occur. Our skin will get burnt, the hand will get burnt, so that time we do not have that much time. So in that case, this action occurs not at the level of brain. Generally it occurs at the level of spinal cord. That's how we can do it so quickly. So how can we define reflex action? It is a rapid automatic. Now we have to give its definition as well, because the students who are studying this lecture, they may belong to, although it is a crash course, so a lecture, but they must have got these questions in their 11th standard subjective questions also. So at least you should know how to define them. So it is a rapid automatic involuntary. That means it is not under your control. So it is very quick, it is happening automatically, it is involuntary, unconscious, because you are not removing your hand consciously. Unconscious response towards a stimulus, or stimuli, stimuli means there can be more than one stimulus also, by the effector. Effector can be anything. Effector can be your any tissue or cell or organ, organ or muscle, anything, whoever is responding, right? So by the effector at the level of spinal cord, of spinal cord. Understood? So this is how, for example, whenever any dust particle goes into your eyes start blinking very quickly, and then tears start coming out of your eyes. So watering of eyes due to that entry of dust particle, that is also a kind of reflex action only. Okay, then you start coughing whenever any kind of dust particles, they enter into your respiratory tract, because they are acting like a stimulus, like stimuli to you. So they are this coughing due to them is also an example of reflex action, right? So now to understand it more in a more better way, we can say that this is your stimulus. Okay, so this is your stimulus, and it is uh, received by a receptor. It is received by a receptor, and this receptor is sending signal to spinal cord via sensory neurons. Via sensory neurons. Okay, so let me write spinal cord over here. This is spinal cord. So these signals are sent to the spinal cord via sensory or afferent neurons, because you have been told that afferent are the ones which carry from one location to another, from receptor to spinal cord here. So neurons we can write, right? And then from spinal cord, these they reach to the effector. From spinal cord they reach to the effector, who is going to perform the function, perform the action or response. Okay, so that's how they will reach here, but via motor neurons or efferent neurons. So we can write over here motor or efferent neurons, right? And then your effector, it will perform the final, it will show the final response or reaction. So because it is there in the form of a arc, so you can call it reflex arc. You can see that it is like this in the form of a arc, no? So we can call this is the diagram of reflex arc, representing reflex pathway. Representing reflex pathway, that how reflex action happens. Reflex pathway. So this way we can understand it, and we can understand it with the help of a diagram also. So let's draw it. We are moving on to next slide now, and this diagram will make you understand each and everything very clearly. So this is the diagram which we are going to make is of knee-jerk reflex. Okay, so this is the diagram of knee-jerk reflex, where we are representing the diagram of a leg, and this is how it is going to show response or reaction. And from here a stimulus is coming, a hammer we are making, because whenever this diagram is represented, it is represented like this. This is a hammer and this is considered as a stimulus. So whenever on your knee any stimulus puts a bang on, that means it is getting hit to your knee part. So there in the knee part you have your muscles which act as receptors, So this is one muscle and this is another. So this one muscle is considered as muscle receptor, and it is going to receive this stimulus. And here we have this spinal cord with us, which is looking like this. Okay, so this part is considered as your gray matter of spinal cord, and the outer part is white matter, because here the things are opposite. As you said in brain, outer part is gray matter, but here the things are opposite, as here the outer part is white matter and the inner part is gray matter. So this can be written as gray matter inside more in amount, and the outside part is considered as white matter. So from here, these sensory neurons, they carry this signal to the spinal cord. So I can write again the same thing, sensory or efferent neuron. This is, and it is making a synapse with the motor neuron like this. And this is how, as a reaction, the leg moves and there is kicking up of leg due to the receival of the stimulus here in this case, which is your hammer. So there is only one synapse formed over here, and this is the diagram of monosynaptic reflex, which is also called as knee-jerk reflex. But at the same time, we can represent polysynaptic reflex also over here. How the same thing will happen, but the thing which is going to change is, this was your sensory neuron which reaches to the spinal cord, right? And it forms a synapse with interneurons over here. So these are interneurons. And in the last case, if you remember, I did not take the name of interneurons. So this is the difference basically between both of them. So this is your, again, motor neuron. So you need to understand that the kicking up of leg, which was happening via only one synapse, it is due to or via the contraction of muscles, which is called as quadriceps femoris muscle, which is a front thigh muscle. But at the same time, the back thigh muscle, if it is your thigh, so this is front muscle, consider it as your thigh. So this is the front thigh muscle, quadriceps femoris, which will show contraction. But at the same time, the back thigh muscle, which is hamstrings muscle, it has to be in relaxed state, right? Only then it will be able to perform function. So there will be kicking up of leg, like this, as a response or a reaction by the contraction of quadriceps femoris muscles, right? So that was happening without the presence of interneurons. But in case of polysynaptic reflex, poly means many, that means there can be presence of many synapses. Okay, so I can write in here that it is representing, this diagram is representing both, one is knee-jerk reflex, which is just the example of monosynaptic reflex, but this diagram represents both arcs. Represents both arcs, that is monosynaptic plus polysynaptic. Monosynaptic plus polysynaptic reflex arcs. So I guess now this diagram and whatever we reflex action pathway we talked about, you must have understood that, right? And we can say that this is how types of reflexes can be two types of reflexes can be two. One is mono, on the basis of number of synapses I am talking about. So one is monosynaptic reflex, one is monosynaptic reflex. Mono means one, that means only one synapse is going to be there and it has only one example, that is your knee jerk reflex. And another can be polysynaptic reflex. Polysynaptic reflex, that means poly means many synapses, and all other reflexes will come into this category. All other reflexes will come into this category, and this classification we have said according to synapse number, on basis of number of synapse. And then we can have one more type. Reflexes can be of two types more, unconditioned and conditioned. So here we can write unconditioned. Unconditioned, they are also called as spinal reflexes because they occur at the level of spinal cord. And the another category which we have is conditioned. They are also called as cerebral. So spinal reflexes which we have which were not required to be learned at any stage of our life. For example, the same moving of hand due to touching of hot plate, moving of hand, or even that dust particle example, watering of eyes due to dust particle, watering of eyes due to dust particle, coughing due to the presence of dust particles in respiratory tract, etc. But then in case of conditioning, there is some kind of learning at some stage of your life. So there you can give the example of cycling, writing. So if I stop you to write for 10 years or more, and then suddenly you are given a book and a notebook and a pen, so you will feel like, oh, I have forgotten how to write. But when you'll start doing it slowly and gradually, you'll feel that no, I remember it even after those 10 years. Similarly, cycling, if you do not ride a bicycle for 8 years, 9 years, that means for a long period of time, but then when it is given to you, you will feel like that you have forgotten to how to ride it. But then whenever you'll start pedaling, so you will be able to do it easily, because at some stage of life we have learned it, and we do not forget these kind of learned activities. So these are stored, the information is stored in the brain. So that's how they are called as conditioned or cerebral reflexes. And knitting without looking, that is also that can be an example of conditioned or cerebral reflexes only. Playing a musical instrument, these all are examples of this category. So knitting without looking by your mother or grandmother, right? So all these are examples of conditioned reflexes. But two examples are there which are relevant to salivation. Salivation on tasting the food, it comes under the category of unconditioned. But salivation just on seeing the food, because you have learned its taste and you remember that it tastes very very tasty. So whenever you see that food, for example, we can take the example of pizza. So I know the taste of that, and whenever I will see it, I will start having salivation in my mouth. But that is the example of conditioned or cerebral reflex, because I know its taste already. So that is there in my mind, and whenever salivation occurs after tasting some food for the first time, that goes into the category of unconditioned or spinal reflexes. So this was all about reflex actions and their examples. And now we are moving on to our PNS. PNS means peripheral nervous system. It consists of cranial nerves and spinal nerves. So first of all, we have to talk about cranial nerves. Okay, so we have 12 pairs of cranial nerves. Let's take the first heading as cranial nerves. So we have 12 pairs of cranial nerves. That means in total we have 24 nerves, cranial nerves. So we are going to talk about them. Their first of all, their name and their origin, then their distribution, their nature, that whether they are sensory, motor or mixed, and their function. So that's how we are going to cover them up, right? So like this we can do it. So let's understand that first of all, you cannot change their sequence. Whichever the first cranial nerve is, you have to name it like that only. So first is olfactory nerve, and olfactory nerve always represents nose, and its origin is olfactory lobe, and its distribution is to your olfactory epithelium, and nature is sensory. First, second and eighth cranial nerves are of sensory nature, and they help in smell. So this is a very easy cranial nerve to remember. Then we have another cranial nerve, optic cranial nerve, and that originates from optic lobe, and the distribution is towards retina of eye, and we all know that it is sensory in nature, as I just told you. So I am going to write S for that, and it also helps in vision according to your retina. Then we have third cranial nerve, that is considered as oculomotor. From oculomotor, that means this third and fourth, both they are going to be originated from floor of midbrain. Okay, so we can write midbrain over here. And then we have this distribution. They distribute to muscles of eyeball, 4 muscles of eyeball. Eyeball has total 6 muscles, but it supplies to 4 muscles of eyeball, and it is of motor nature, and it helps in rotation of eyeball, power of accommodation, all these things it helps in. Then the fourth cranial nerve we have is trochlear nerve. Now you must be thinking that how you are going to learn it. You have to sit and learn them, because they are important for you, and you have to remember them anyhow. Olfactory term represents nose, so that's how you can learn it. Optic term represents eyes, that's how you can learn them. The origin is going to be same in this case, trochlear, and it supplies to 5th muscle of your eyeball, that is superior rectus muscle of eyeball. Superior rectus muscle of eyeball, and it is of motor nature again, and here it also helps in rotation. Then we have the fifth cranial nerve with us, and we can make the columns again. Okay, like this. This is for origin. This is for distribution. This is for nature, and last for function. So fifth is trigeminal. This is considered as the largest cranial nerve, and your smallest was trochlear one. It has three divisions: maxillary, mandibular, and ophthalmic. And ophthalmic represents eyes only. And from fifth to eighth, they all arise from pons, varuli, and their distribution is towards head, face, jaws, teeth to them, and the nature is mixed, so it performs both kind of functions. For example, it supplies to all these places: head, jaws, face, teeth, and it also helps to perform motor activities like chewing and mastication, because when it is supplying to jaws, so it is understood to you the movement of jaws, which helps you to masticate or chew the food. So that's how it works. Then we have sixth cranial nerve, and that is called by the name abducens. Abducens arises from same, that is pons, and it supplies to the sixth muscle of eyeball, that is called as external rectus muscle of eyeball, and it is of motor nature, so we can write motor, right? This was the fifth one. Okay, and the function is again going to be rotation of eyeball, rotation of eyeball. Then we have seventh cranial nerve, which is called by the name facial nerve, and facial nerve has same origin. It supplies to anterior two-third part of tongue. So remember, now that lecture of mine from digestive system, we divided the tongue into two parts: anterior oral part and posterior part. So anterior two-third part of tongue is supplied by facial nerve. Apart from that, it supplies to face and neck. It is of mixed nature, so it is going to supply all over them, will help in taste, that's how, and it will help in facial expression. So whatever facial expression you do, that is because of the help of facial nerve only. And then we have our eighth cranial nerve, that is called as auditory or vestibulocochlear nerve, vestibulocochlear nerve, and this originates from same, that is pons. It is going to supply to cochlea, that is hearing organ of your ear, and semicircular canals, which help to maintain balance, because you should know that the function of your ear is not just to hear, help in hearing, but it also helps to maintain balance via these circular canals. How you will understand that in your upcoming lectures. So it is of sensory nature, and it is helping in hearing and in maintaining equilibrium, okay. Then we have the ninth cranial nerve, which is called as glossopharyngeal nerve, Glosso means tongue, and pharyngeal, it means, it is representing pharynx. So glossopharyngeal nerve, from here this is going to originate from side of medulla. All the nerves are going to originate from here now onwards, and it is going to supply posterior one-third part of tongue posterior 1/3 part of tongue, pharynx also, mucous membrane also, but these are two main parts where it supplies, and it is of mixed nature, so it will help in taste for sure, touch and taste both, and it will help in movements of pharynx. So that's how we have completed 9 till now, and we are left with 3 more. So let us continue this chart. This is your name of the nerve, this is their origin, this is going to be the distribution nature. So the tenth cranial nerve moving ahead with us is vagus nerve. That is very important nerve. Why? Because this is considered as the longest nerve. It is considered to have maximum distribution, maximum branches. It is also called as pneumogastric nerve. Pneumogastric nerve, and origin is going to be again same. Then we have the distribution, and it supplies from pharynx, vocal cords. Then we have this esophagus, heart, lungs, stomach, intestine, all these places it supplies. So vocal cords, for example, esophagus, stomach, heart, lungs. So it has the largest distribution overall, heart, lungs, etc., and it is of mixed nature, and wherever it is supplying there it will perform the respective functions. That means movement of pharynx, that means it helps in speech, for example gastric secretions, it will help them to secrete. Then we have this slowing down the heartbeat. This is very important. Slowing down means bringing back to the normal state. Okay. Then we have swallowing via pharynx, peristalsis via esophagus, peristalsis. So all these are can be the functions of your vagus nerve. Then we have another 11th cranial nerve, which is spinal accessory, and the origin is going to be the same. Okay, let me follow our old pattern. So spinal accessory, we can say spinal accessory. Then we have the same origin. We say that it supplies in larynx and shoulder. Then it is of motor nature, and it helps in the movements of shoulder. And your last cranial nerve is hypoglossal, which supplies to the muscles of tongue. Hypo means below and glossal means tongue. So it origins from the same medulla, and it supplies to muscles of tongue, and it is again of motor nature, and it helps in movements of tongue. So this was all about the cranial 12 cranial nerves beginning from olfactory to hypoglossal. Okay, so now immediately we are moving on to spinal nerves. That is going to be your second part of this segment, that is your spinal nerves, and you have to remember that spinal nerves are as follows: cervical 8, T12, thoracic 12, lumbar 5, sacral 5, and coccyx 1, and that's how you have 31 pairs, that is total 62. And it has certain branches also. The branches include posterior or dorsal branch, which supplies to back, obviously. Then the another second branch is the main spinal branch, anterior or ventral, because it supplies to a larger part, front and sides. Then we have the third branch, meningeal, which supplies around meninges, around ligaments, vessels of meninges. And the fourth branch is visceral or ramus communicans. You can say visceral branch. Okay, and out of them, many form plexuses also. The plexuses, that is the bundles which we have. First is neck plexus, which is called as cervical plexus. It includes C1 to C4, and phrenic, that is from diaphragm, that is diaphragm nerve, phrenic nerve. Then we have arm plexus, that is your brachial plexus. So it includes C5 to C8 and T1, and supply the cervical one supplies to neck and diaphragm, and brachial supplies to your whole arm. And then your third plexus, lumbar, which includes L1 to L4, and supplies to the abdomen part. Then we have sacral plexus, L4 or L5, the remaining one, and S1 to S4, and it supplies to your hip joint. And then we have coccygeal, which are the remaining ones, that mean S4 or S5, and the coccyx, and it will supply to the remaining part of the hip joint. Okay, so this was about the spinal nerves, and now we have reached on to the autonomic nervous system, that is ANS, which includes sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So when you compare sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system structurally, so you get to see that in sympathetic we have a sympathetic chain of 21 sympathetic ganglia, So first is here, sympathetic chain is present. Having 21 ganglia. But in case of parasympathetic, you do not have that chain. Here collateral ganglia are present, which help in supplying to the visceral organs or organs of your body, but here those ganglia are not present. Ganglia like celiac ganglion, etc., superior mesenteric, inferior mesenteric, they are not present. Here thoracolumbar outflow is seen because the nerves, they arise from thoracic and lumbar region only, but here craniosacral flow is seen because they arise from cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, 10, and your sacral region S2, S3 and S4. And here you can say the preganglionic fibers, they are smaller as compared to postganglionic fibers. They are smaller than postganglionic fibers. then post ganglionic fibers, but then here in their case it is just opposite, that means vice versa. And these sympathetic fibers, they are of adrenergic nature because they secrete adrenaline, and these are cholinergic in nature because they secrete acetylcholine. So these were the structural differences, but now when we talk about their functional differences, this is a very important table and the last topic of today. So you have to learn it because you will find many questions out of it. So sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sympathetic always generally increases things, and the role of parasympathetic is generally to bring them back to normal. So that's how we can say that in case of pupil, sympathetic helps in its dilation, but parasympathetic helps in its constriction. Then whatever secretions occur from glands, all are increased by all are decreased by sympathetic, but they are increased by parasympathetic. For example, saliva, bile, intestinal juice, digestive juice. uh, Parasympathetic brings them back to normal, to their normal secretion. When we talk about liver converts glycogen into glucose, so it increases the concentration of glucose and bile secretion gets reduced here, and here glycogen is formed as glucose, extra glucose get converted into glycogen and secretion is increased. Similarly, your heartbeat, it is increased by sympathetic and decreased, or parasympathetic brings it back to normal. Then your arteries, in case of arteries here dilation occurs, which here constriction occurs, which leads to increase in BP. And in this case of parasympathetic, dilation occurs, and here BP is increased by sympathetic and decreased by parasympathetic. Similarly, urinary bladder, it relaxes here, and here it shows contraction so that normal the muscles show contraction so that normal urination can occur. These are certain examples. In fact, respiration, bronchial muscles, you can also take its example. Bronchial muscles, there is widening of these muscles which increases breathing, and here narrowing occurs which hinders breathing. Here it facilitates, here it hinders, and some places are there, where this parasympathetic does not supply, and those are your where parasympathetic does not give it supply. So I can write those. Sympathetic supply is absent. The example is skin, cutaneous blood vessels. Cutaneous term also means skin. Cutaneous blood vessels, sweat glands, and erector pili muscles. Sweat glands and erector pili muscles which help in the erection of hair, goosebumps or goose flesh, which you call them. It occurs with the help of erector pili muscles, but here parasympathetic supply is absent. So when I'm going back to the last slide, I can say that sweat glands are under the control of sympathetic supply only, and here perspiration occurs and there is no function done by the help of parasympathetic. And when perspiration occurs, cooling effect is received. and this is happening via acetylcholine, which is an exception in case of sympathetic, because otherwise sympathetic fibers are adrenergic in nature, remember. And in case of erector pili muscles, they help in erector muscles, they help in erection of hair with the help of sympathetic supply, but here there is no parasympathetic supply present. Okay, so now this was all about your CNS and PNS, and we will be meeting in the next lecture and talking about the next subtopic of the same chapter. Thank you.